So a couple convinced investors to hand over $57 million by promising that they could flip luxury supercars to wealthy overseas buyers for absolute insane profit margins. Except there was no buyers. They didn't exist at all. And now they're facing 75 charges after police seized dozens of exotic vehicles from their $2 million mansion. And the wildest part about this story is what made everything come crashing down on him was one single poker bet.
Investigators reveal more about what Metro Police call a massive fraud scam involving a promise of a $2 billion return. These are just some of the cars and boats police say Zhang and Nilufar Ri told investors to buy so they could then resell them to overseas luxury car buyers.
But before I get into how everything fell apart, meet Zhang Ri, a 45-year-old entrepreneur who also goes by John Lusso, and his wife, Nilufar Ri, who is 34 and is also known as Nilu. For some reason, I can't find any public photos of them and not even a mugshot. So that's a first for me, and I don't know what's going on there. But this couple has been operating a handful of businesses around Las Vegas for years, and if you look at their track record, they do not shy away from controversy. Court records show that Zhang was already wrapped up in various lawsuits by 2022. Even his own lawyers quit on him. The motion basically said that Zhang failed to communicate effectively with his lawyers and hadn't been holding up his end of the engagement agreement. But despite all of these red flags popping up in the background, Zhang and Nilu, they just kept expanding their businesses throughout 2023 and 2024 like nothing was ever wrong. And they were running companies like Twisted Twins Motorsports and Lusso Auto Spa, which were marketed as high-end automotive businesses catering to luxury car enthusiasts. They also owned a restaurant called 8 Kitchen over in Henderson, Nevada. Though that place has since closed down, they had their hands in a bunch of other businesses like boutique businesses, high-end home studios, and even some Pinkberry franchise locations out in California. But here's where things get interesting, because according to the people who actually work with the Ries, Zhang had a particular playbook in attracting new clients and potential investors. He would deliberately park expensive, eye-catching cars in high-trafficked areas where they'd get maximum attention. And of course, this was all strategic because when people started walking up to the car, he just kind of appeared out of nowhere and started talking to them. And what's kind of fascinating is Zhang's entire sales funnel was parking Lambos in public and waiting for people to ask questions. One guy who ended up falling for it ended up working for quite a few of Zhang's businesses. And he claimed that Zhang was a flashy and calculated person. And with the exception of those Pinkberry stores, basically every venture the Ries touched seemed focused on targeting wealthy but poorly informed customers. Now, even before we get into the massive fraud scheme that eventually got him arrested, it's worth understanding that the Ries were already operating in some pretty questionable territory with their illegitimate businesses as well. Because according to that same contractor who worked with them, the couple had a reputation of cutting corners and making things up to some ridiculous levels. For example, they would allegedly import cheap knockoff wheels from China, like the kind of wheels that probably cost maybe a few $100s per set, and then they'd mount those onto high-end luxury vehicles and then flip cars for massive markups, as if those wheels were legitimate high-end parts. They also offered cosmetic services through Auto Lusso Spa, such as custom vinyl wraps, window tinting, and basic detailing work. But the prices they were charging for these services were apparently way beyond what any reasonable person would consider a fair value. And while they advertised more complex services like high-end custom paint jobs, the actual execution wasn't always matching what they were claiming it was going to be like. Because I mean, this is just ridiculous, but one customer wanted their RC yacht to be painted just like their real one. So Zhang said, hey, that'll be $25,000. And while that sounds like highway robbery, what makes it worse is Zhang realized he couldn't do the work. So after taking the client's money, they then scrambled to find a painter, and then he agreed to do the work for about $3,000. So Zhang pocketed roughly $22,000 in pure profit margin on that one single job. And even after making that much money off the deal, he allegedly made the actual painter fight just to get paid the $3,000. Apparently, that's the kind of operation the Ries were running. And even with all these questionable business practices generating income, the contractor said that there was one thing that never quite made sense. The math never added up. Because the contractor was like, I know we're making some money, but how is this guy just going out and buying a brand new Rolls Royce? And it wasn't just one Rolls Royce. A few weeks later, he showed up in a custom blue G-Wagon. Then shortly later, he ordered an S-Class in the same special order color. The couple's lifestyle was clearly operating on a completely different financial level than what their businesses could actually realistically support. But at the time, nobody knew where all that extra money was actually coming from. So while the Ries were running their automotive shops and other ventures around Las Vegas, they were also also quietly working on something much bigger behind the scenes. They started approaching people with what seemed to be an incredible investment opportunity. Zhang would tell potential investors that he had exclusive connections to super wealthy buyers overseas, particularly in places like Singapore, who were desperate to get their hands on luxury vehicles and boats that were either difficult or impossible to acquire in their home countries. The story was import restrictions limited availability, and high demand in those foreign markets meant that vehicles purchased in the United States could be resold overseas for some insane profit margins. And they were heavily exaggerated because, according to investigators, Zhang told investors that a 2024 Rolls-Royce Spectre in the US market with a value of about $500,000 could be sold to his overseas contacts for $7.5 million. And I'm surprised people with that much money would actually believe that, because that's essentially a 1,300% markup. Sometimes it really is too good to be true. And in another pitch, he said that a boat valued at $3.9 million in the US could be sold in Singapore for $13.5 million. Well, the most insane claim must be when Zhang allegedly told investors that if they contributed to a $57 million investment pool to purchase multiple vehicles and assets, he could turn that into $2.5 billion through his overseas connections. And for context, if anyone could guarantee those kind of returns, every single hedge fund would be all over that. But Zhang positioned himself as the guy with secret access, the insider connections and the special knowledge that made these deals possible, and apparently some people bought into it. Because the pitch was that regular people couldn't access these overseas markets on their own, but by investing through Zhang's businesses, Twisted Twins Motorsports and Lusso Auto Spa, they could participate in these exclusive deals and share the substantial profits when the vehicles were sold. So here's how the whole thing falls apart, because after months of investigation involving multiple law enforcement agencies across several states, police came to one pretty definitive conclusion. Those overseas buyers did not exist. At all. Bro just made up some people and he was like, hey, give me $57 million and I'll, go ahead and lose your money, I guess. Wow. GG. Maybe we shouldn't trust a guy with a Lambo trying to sell you something, standing in front of a Lambo. This goes for course sellers, and this goes for, real-life solicitors. Because investigators say they found zero evidence that Zhang actually ever had contacted any of these international clients, made any arrangements to ship any vehicles overseas, or set up any import/export deals, or had any legitimate business connections in Singapore or anywhere else to support any of these profit claims. The whole situation just didn't make sense. So if the money wasn't being used to buy cars that would be flipped overseas for profits, where exactly was it going? Well, according to police reports, the Rees weren't using investor funds for any kind of legitimate business purposes whatsoever. Instead, they were spending that money on themselves, and they were not being subtle about it at all. Because when Las Vegas police executed a search warrant on their couple's $2 million home in Henderson back in October of 2024, they found an insane collection of exotic cars. And I'm not talking about more common luxury cars like S-Classes or Porsche 911s. No, a Bugatti Chiron, a Bugatti Divo, a Pagani Huayra R. Only 30 Huayras exist, only 40 Divos exist, and I think only 80 Chiron Supersports exist. So there's not a lot of them in the world. Also, an Apollo Intensa Emozione. Unsure how you pronounce that one, to be honest, but apparently only 10 of those exist. And also, just to put things in perspective, each of those cars are about $3 million. They also seized a custom 2,500 horsepower boat who Zhang actually told his investors that he sold overseas, but apparently not. He just kept that one for himself. But investigators also say the Rees used the investor money to fund a lifestyle that included chartered private jets, with a $60,000 private jet trip to Missouri to go boating. Then they attempted to buy a bar and a residential property on Lake Havasu, Arizona, and then multiple trips to California and various other personal expenses and lifestyle enrichment. So while investors thought their money was going to assets to, give them some returns, the Rees just blew it on personal crap. And by the middle of 2024, the whole operation started to fall apart. Because here's the thing about a Ponzi. They only work as long as new money starts coming in. Once you can't find new investors to cover your promises, you're kind of SOL. And for the Rees, the collapse started happening at full speed, because according to the investigation and text messages that the police later recovered from their phones, the couple was under serious financial pressure mid-2024. They were dealing with mounting debts, delayed payments, and what they described as unreliable business partners, which probably means other people in their network were running out of money. And text messages between Zhang and Nilu from April 2025 showed just how desperate things have gotten. In one message, Zhang wrote, "We are in big trouble for money." Another, "Right now, our lives are on the line." And it's safe to say he wasn't exaggerating. The couple was genuinely panicking because their entire operation was collapsing and they had no way to cover their obligations. The former contractor who worked with them said his paychecks completely stopped around this time as well. But Jung kept assuring him that everything was fine and the money would be there soon. But the money never came. Today, that contractor still owed more than $10,000. And since the news of the arrest broke, several others have reached out to him saying they were owed way more money. And according to the police and the details laid out in their arrest warrant, by summer of 2024, the couple was so broke and desperate that Jung decided to make one final gamble to try to save everything. And I mean, literally. Police say that Jung was a frequent gambler who regularly played high-stakes poker tournaments. But during the summer of 2024, with their finances completely wrecked, the couple decided one last $10,000 bet, and they used it to enter the World Series Poker main event. I guess he was just apparently hoping for a massive tournament win that would magically solve all their money problems, except obviously that didn't happen. And according to investigators, this failed poker bet was right around the time where the couple's behavior became even more desperate, and the fraud scheme went into full panic mode. But what the Reeds probably didn't realize was, while they were scrambling to keep their operation afloat, law enforcement had been building a case against them for months. And this wasn't just some local Las Vegas investigation. This thing involved multiple agencies across several states and even federal partners. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, the FBI field offices of Las Vegas, Phoenix, Florida, Kentucky, and the Los Angeles Police Department, the Arizona Department of Public Safety, Lake Havasu Police Department, Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, Pennsylvania State Police, and the Nevada Gaming Control Board. So, needless to say, that's a lot of agencies for one investigation, which tells us just how widespread and complex this fraud scheme really was. And in October 2024, investigators executed a search warrant on the couple's Henderson home, and that's where they hit the full-on jackpot. They found all the exotic vehicles we talked about parked in and around the property. They seized the electronic devices, computers, phones, and financial records, and even recovered the text messages between Jung and Nilu that basically confirmed they were in some serious trouble and had been so for quite a while. But investigators didn't stop there. They spent months tracking down victims, following money trails, documenting transactions, and building an ironclad case against this couple. They interviewed former employees and business associates, subpoenaed bank records, and traced where the money came from and where it went. By the time they were done, investigators had compiled a 94-page arrest warrant. They laid out their entire fraud scheme. So in May of 2025, Las Vegas police showed up to their home and placed both Jung and Nilüfer under arrest. They were both transported to Clark County Detention Center and booked on over 75 felony charges each, with a list of charges including multiple counts of racketeering, forgery, theft, and money laundering. They have a whole video showing all the stolen cars here. Dude, look at that boat. There's the Chiron. There's the... I don't even know what that is. That other car was actually probably the unpronounceable one. That's the Bugatti Divo. And there's the Huayra. Yeah, what's good having all these hypercars if you have to spend 20 years in prison plus? But at the press release, police made it very clear they believe there was way more victims that just haven't came forward yet. So this whole thing might even be bigger than the $57 million they've already documented. So both Jung and Nilu, they posted bail at $100,000 each, and they were released from custody while awaiting trial. They were scheduled to appear in court on June 9th of 2025, though a lot of court documents in the case remain sealed, which is pretty standard for ongoing fraud investigations. What I am surprised about is no mugshots, nor any pictures about them online. Like, I haven't been able to find anything. And I don't just want to throw up a random picture of someone with the same name because I can't confirm this is actually them. So as of right now, I need to wait for an official police report or something that confirms their face. And I guess for all those seized hypercars, they didn't just sit in the police impound lot collecting dust, because on August 2025, several of those vehicles have been scheduled to go up for auction. And as of now, the case is still working its way through the court system. Jung and Nilu are facing dozens of felony charges, and if they're convicted on even a fraction of those counts, it's safe to say they're looking at decades in prison. And I guess the most fitting part of this story must be the guy taking their last $10,000 and just gambling away in a poker tournament because he thought he could beat the odds, which is honestly kind of a perfect metaphor for this entire fraud scheme, taking other people's money and betting it all against a losing hand. But as soon as I found out a guy essentially scammed $57 million from essentially soliciting on the streets of Las Vegas, I felt like I had to cover it. I thought it was a fascinating story, and it'll definitely be interesting to see what happens next. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, feel free to subscribe, drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Peace.